Cato's name was whispered in fear. The brothers moved through the savannah like shadows. And the people of Marenga found themselves trapped in a nightmare where the line between hunter and hunted was drawn in blood. The savannah stretched endlessly. Beneath the sun, golden grass swaying with the rhythm of the wind. From a distance, the village of Marenga looked almost like a mirage, a cluster of mud brick huts circled by thorn fences to keep the cattle safe at night. Smoke rose slowly from cooking fires, and the laughter of children carried on the air. To anyone passing through, it seemed like a place where life was simple, steady, and untouched by the chaos of the outside world. But beneath that quiet, something unsettling had begun to stir. And soon, the peace that defined Marenga would be shattered forever. At first, no one paid much attention to the strange disappearances. A goat or two missing could be blamed on lions, and a cow that wandered too far might fall prey to hyenas. These things happened, and the people of Marenga had learned long ago to accept the risks of living on the edge of the wild. But one morning, when a herdsman failed to return with his cattle, the villagers grew uneasy. Search parties were sent out into the tall grass, and for 2 days, nothing was found. On the third morning, vultures circled in the distance, their dark shapes hovering against the pale sky. The men followed the birds, and what they discovered changed the mood of the entire village. The herdsman's body lay sprawled on the ground, his throat slashed open, his eyes staring lifeless at the sun. Round him, the grass was soaked with blood already turning brown under the heat. The cattle he had been tending had scattered, and the soil bore deep footprints that were not animal prints but human. The scene was too deliberate, too clean, too cold. It was not the work of wild creatures. Someone had killed him. Someone had left his body out in the open, as if daring the village to find it. News of the discovery spread quickly. Families gathered. In the center of Marenga, whispering of curses, spirits, and revenge. Some believed an old grudge had resurfaced, that blood feuds from years past had come alive again. Others spoke of something darker, presence that roamed the savannah under the cover of night, choosing victims and leaving them behind like warnings. Fear grew with each story, and soon even the children refused to wander too far from there. Homes then, more strange signs appeared. Goats were found mutilated far from the pens. Their remains scattered, as though someone had torn them apart methodically. Water jars left near the well were smashed during the night, though no footprints led away. Fires burned in the distance, and sometimes at dawn villagers swore they saw a figure moving among the trees, watching, waiting. Each passing day tightened the hold of dread, and the laughter that once filled the village was replaced by silence and suspicion. The elders tried to calm the people, insisting that wild animals or raiders were to blame, but the villagers knew better. This was not random violence. The killings bore intention. The body of the herdsman had not been hidden but displayed. The mutilated goats had been left in places where they would be found quickly. Whoever was behind it wanted to instill terror, and it was working. The nights in Marenga grew longer, filled with restless sleep and the distant cries of animals echoing across the savannah. The village stood on edge, waiting for the next strike, and though no one could admit it aloud, a shared thought haunted every heart. Someone in the shadows had turned the wide-open beauty of the savannah into a hunting ground. Marenga was no longer safe, and blood had already marked the soil. This was only the beginning. The weeks that followed the first murder deepened the fear that had settled over Marenga. Life continued in appearance. The cattle were still taken to graze, women still fetched water from the well, children still carried bundles of firewood, but nothing felt the same. People moved more cautiously, always looking over their shoulders, always waiting for something to happen. The savannah, that once symbolized freedom, now felt like a trap. Every rustle in the tall grass, every cry of a night bird, became a reminder that danger was close. When the next body was found, all hope of a passing misfortune vanished. This time it was a young boy, no older than 12, who had gone missing on his way back from the river. His body was discovered in a shallow clearing, his limbs arranged in a way that seemed purposeful, his skin marked with cuts that were too clean to be accidents.
Ow.
Nearby, strange carvings were etched into the dirt, shapes that made no sense but carried an air of menace. The villagers gathered around in horror, but none could explain what they were seeing. The elders who had lived through droughts, famines, and raids shook their heads. They had never encountered anything like this before. Word spread quickly beyond Marenga, and soon police from the nearest town were sent to investigate. They arrived with their rifles and their notebooks, questioning families and searching the surrounding fields. At first, they suspected wild animals, but the patterns did not fit. The cuts on the bodies were sharp, as if made by blades. The footprints left behind were human, not paw prints. The arrangement of the dead was too deliberate. This was not nature's doing. It was the work of a person, or perhaps more than one. Each discovery added to the sense of doom. Another farmer was found near the edge of the grazing fields, his chest pierced by a single wound, his cattle wandering nearby as though nothing had happened. A traveler who had been passing through never reached his destination. His remains turned up days later in the dry riverbed, his belongings untouched. His life ended for reasons no one could understand. Each victim was left in a place where they would be discovered, as if the killer wanted to make sure their presence was felt. It was not simply murder, it was a message. The police tried to reassure the villagers, but their presence only fueled the unease. People noticed the fear in the officers' own eyes as they walked through the fields. Noticed how quickly they packed up each evening before the sun disappeared behind the acacias. Even the men who carried rifles seemed reluctant to stay after dark. If the ones meant to protect them were afraid, what chance did ordinary families have? The savannah, vast and open, no longer offered escape. It offered only exposure. Whispers of superstition grew louder. Some claimed the murders were the work of spirits angered by broken traditions. Others said it was a curse brought by strangers who had passed through during the last trading season. But beneath these tales lay another belief, one far more unsettling. People began to suspect that the killer was not an outsider at all, but someone within Marenga itself. The cuts, the careful placement of bodies, the deliberate way in which the fear spread, these things felt too intimate, too close. It was as though the killer knew them, knew their lives, and was using that knowledge to unravel the community from within. With every passing night, families barred their doors tightly. Praying that they would be spared, no one ventured into the savannah alone anymore. The wide skies and open fields, once symbols of endless possibility, had turned into an endless stage for death. And still, the killings continued, as steady and merciless as the sun rising each morning. The villagers could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, stalked by someone who moved through the grass unseen, someone who was always one step ahead. The pattern was growing clearer, and with it came the realization that Marenga was caught in the grip of something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. Suspicion was a heavy weight in Marenga. Pressing down on every conversation and every glance between neighbors, trust began to unravel, replaced by quiet judgment and whispered accusations. When the killings showed no sign of stopping, people started to look for someone to blame, and the attention turned toward Cato. He lived alone in a crumbling hut on the far edge of the village, close enough to be part of the community but distant enough to be considered an outsider. His days were spent wandering the bush, returning with game or sometimes nothing at all. He had no wife, no children, no family to anchor him. To many, his isolation seemed suspicious, and in times of fear, suspicion was enough to ignite blame. Cato's past gave the rumors more weight. Years earlier, his family had been killed during a violent raid by cattle thieves. When he returned from the city after disappearing for a long time, he was changed. His once friendly nature was gone, replaced by silence and an air of bitterness. He avoided gatherings, and when he spoke, it was often in short, unsettling phrases that left others uneasy. Children were told not to go near him, and though he had never harmed anyone, people could not ignore the unease he inspired. When the killings began, it seemed almost natural that his name rose first in fearful whispers. The police, already desperate for answers, seized upon the suspicion. They searched Cato's hut one hot afternoon while half the village watched from a distance. Inside, they found knives carefully sharpened, bundles of animal bones, and a tattered notebook filled with strange drawings. The sketches showed figures of both cattle and humans laid out in patterns eerily similar to the way the bodies had been discovered. The discovery spread panic like wildfire. Too many, this was proof that Cato was behind the terror. The villagers whispered angrily among themselves, demanding justice, demanding that he be cast out, or worse. But the police hesitated. The evidence, while disturbing, was not enough. The knives bore no blood. The bones were clearly animal remains, not human. The notebook was strange, but not illegal, without proof that connected him directly to the killings. They could not act. Reluctantly, they let him go. The decision only deepened the tension. Some saw it as weakness, others as corruption. The villagers were certain the police had released a killer back into their midst. That night, no one slept there. Worst fears were realized the following morning when another body appeared, this time in the very center of Marenga. A farmer was found sprawled in the dust, just steps away from the communal fire pit. His death was as brutal as the others, his body displayed openly where everyone would see. The message was unmistakable. The killer was not afraid, not deterred, and not hiding in the shadows anymore. If anything, the act seemed to mock the efforts of both the villagers and the police. The blame on Cato grew louder, though a few began to question the simplicity of the accusation. If he truly was the murderer, why would he kill so openly? So close to where he lived? Why would he risk bringing suspicion back upon himself the very night he was freed? Yet fear is a powerful force, and doubt rarely survived long against it. People avoided his hut, spoke his name only in hushed tones, and looked over their shoulders whenever he passed. The savannah itself seemed to reflect the paranoia. The silence of the nights grew heavier, broken only by the distant cries of hyenas, or the rustle of wind through the grass. Families huddled close, guarding their fires, waiting for the next sign of death. In the minds of many, killer already had a face Cato's, and even though no one had seen him commit the crimes, the community's fear demanded a figure to hate. Yet beneath that certainty, unease lingered. Something about the killings felt larger, more organized, as though there was a purpose yet to be uncovered. If Cato was guilty, it was not the whole story. And if he was innocent, then the real killer still roamed the savannah, unseen and unchecked. The village stood at the edge of collapse. After the body was left in the center of Marenga, people no longer believed safety could be found anywhere, not in their homes, not in their fields, not even under the protection of the police. Rumors about Cato hardened into certainty for many, and a group of villagers began to prepare to drive him out. They sharpened machetes, spoke of curses, and warned each other that, as long as he remained among them, blood would continue to flow. But just as the tension reached its highest point, fate intervened with a discovery that shifted the course of the entire mystery. A group of hunters, following the trail of vultures circling in the distance, stumbled across an area of the savannah that none of them had ever entered before. Hidden behind a thicket of thorn bushes was a makeshift camp, almost invisible unless one walked directly upon it. At first, it seemed abandoned. Torn canvas sheets flapped weakly in the wind, and ashes smoldered in a small fire pit. But when the hunters stepped closer, their eyes widened in horror. Blood-stained clothing was scattered across the ground, some of it torn into strips, some of it folded with eerie care. Beside it lay medical instruments, scalpels, needles, and bottles of strange substances, tools that no one in Marenga had ever seen before. Even more disturbing were the photographs. They were tucked into a battered tin box, but the images inside revealed faces that everyone recognized. The victims of the killing stared back at them, captured in life, then in death. The photos showed the bodies arranged in the same deliberate patterns that had haunted the village for weeks. Whoever owned this camp had documented everything, preserving their crimes as though they were trophies. The hunters did not linger. They ran back to Marenga, their voices trembling as they relayed what they had found. When the police arrived and inspected the site, the truth began to unravel. The camp did not belong to Cato. It belonged to strangers who had been moving quietly. Across the region, men who disguised themselves as cattle traders to avoid suspicion. The evidence was overwhelming. Supplies stolen from traveling merchants, maps marked with routes through villages, and lists of names written in a language the villagers could not understand. The killers were outsiders, but they had studied the Savannah carefully, weaving themselves into its patterns and using fear to conceal their actions. The realization shook Marenga to its core. All the suspicion, the anger, the accusations against Cato had been misdirected. He had lived as a scapegoat for crimes he had not committed, his strange habits turning him into the perfect target for collective fear. The true murderers had been hiding in plain sight, moving from place to place, killing with precision, and leaving behind scenes designed to terrify. The villagers had been played, their belief in curses and spirits manipulated to create a smokescreen for human cruelty. Though, relieved to know the truth, the discovery brought no peace. If anything, the fear deepened. The killers were still at large, somewhere out in the endless grasslands, watching, waiting, perhaps planning their next strike. The evidence in the camp revealed something even darker than random bloodlust. Medical tools in the photographs suggested ritual, obsession, or some twisted pursuit that went beyond killing for survival or revenge. This was not simply violence, it was calculated, almost ceremonial. As the police packed the evidence and began to organize a wider search, Marenga felt the weight of the revelation. The real enemy was not within their own circle, but drifting in the vastness of the savannah, a predator who had turned the openness of the land into a canvas for horror. Cato, though innocent, remained isolated, his name stained by suspicion that would never fully fade. The village had been forced to face a truth far more terrifying than any curse or spirit. The greatest danger was not hidden in legends or superstition, but in men who walked among them with ordinary faces, carrying extraordinary darkness. Hunt for the strangers had begun, but no one knew how long it would take, or how many more lives would be lost before it ended. The search for the killers spread across the savannah like a storm, sweeping through villages, riverbeds, and cattle routes. Police patrols set up checkpoints along the dusty roads, and hunters were recruited to track movements in the tall grass. Yet despite the tightened watch, the strangers slipped through the cracks, leaving behind faint traces of their presence, but never their bodies. Fires would appear in the distance only to vanish before anyone arrived. Slaughtered goats were discovered on paths leading to the wells, the carcasses left to rot in the sun. Carvings appeared in the dirt near grazing. Fields, the same unsettling symbols that had haunted the villagers since the first body was found. It was as though the killers were toying with everyone, showing they could still move freely, despite the manhunt closing in. Fear spread beyond Marenga, seeping into neighboring settlements. Merchants stopped traveling along the usual trade routes, and families from nearby hamlets abandoned their homes to seek refuge in larger towns. The savannah itself seemed restless. The cries of hyenas felt closer at night, and even seasoned herdsmen were reluctant to wander far from safety. Everywhere there was the sense of eyes watching from the tall grass, a constant reminder that the strangers were still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. For weeks, the killers evaded capture. Patrols would find evidence of their camp sashes from fresh fires, footprints circling a waterhole, scraps of food left behind, but never the men themselves. They seemed to move with uncanny precision, always one step ahead of those pursuing them. Some began to wonder if they were being tipped off, if someone in the police was feeding them information. The lack of progress wore down morale, and whispers of curses returned. It was easier for many to believe in spirits than to accept that. Two ordinary men could outwit an entire force. The break came unexpectedly. A small patrol set out before dawn, moving silently along a dry riverbed where vultures had gathered. What they found shocked even the most hardened officers. The two brothers, exhausted and unaware, had fallen asleep in the sand, their belongings scattered around them. Beside their camp, a shallow grave had been dug, the body of their latest victim half buried under a thin layer of earth, veiled their desperation. They had grown careless, their energy spent after weeks of evasion. The officers surrounded them quietly, rifles raised, and for the first time, the killers were caught not as phantoms of the savannah, but as men breathing, vulnerable and undeniably human. The arrest brought a rush of relief, but it was a relief tempered by horror. When their possessions were examined, the true scale of their crimes emerged. Bundles of photographs, carefully arranged, documented every victim. Journals filled with symbols and strange writings revealed the obsessive nature of their killings. It was ritual, not chance, that had driven them, a dark compulsion that turned the Savannah into a theater of cruelty. They had not come to Marenga for trade or survival. They'd come to leave their mark in blood, to carve fear into the land itself. As the brothers were led away, villagers gathered to watch, their faces a mix of anger, grief, and disbelief. For some, it was justice. For others, it was too little too late. The scars left behind were too deep to be erased by a single arrest. Families had lost fathers, children, brothers. Fear had uprooted the rhythms of daily life, leaving behind silence where laughter once rang. Though the killers were gone, the memory of their terror lingered, etched into the soil and into the hearts of those who had lived through it. The Savannah slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. Forever changed. Every shadow in the tall grass, every cry carried by the wind, reminded the villagers of the weeks when death walked openly among them. The story of the brothers spread across the region, becoming both a warning and a legend. Strangers were no longer welcomed easily, and suspicion lingered long after the immediate danger had passed. The land looked the same golden grass waving under the vast sky, but for those who remembered, it was marked forever. Blood had seeped into the soil of the Savannah, and though time would soften the edges of the fear, the memory of those days would never truly fade.